In a tavern in a very cold place, the drinking patrons were talking about some crazy guy who runs like a savage in the middle of a battlefield. They say he's a mercenary, but he acts as if he doesn't care about death. When he finishes a fight, he disappears only to show up at the next one. Another man chimed in saying, "A mercenary who doesn't value his own life, that's interesting." But apparently whenever he survives a battle, he says, "Damn, I survived again." And if there's a war involving the Empire, you can be sure that guy will be there. They say he does it more for revenge than for money. The man listening became interested and asked for his name. The speaker replied, "Rumor has it he's a prince from a fallen kingdom. Apparently he's looking for a place to die." At that moment, the narrative shifts to a knight approaching a man with a sad, tired, and empty expression. The knight said that the man's solution to reach his end was self-torture. This was the third prince of Briar Uriel. Briar, a dishonored name belonging to the man who led his kingdom to ruin. The story then explains what happened 10 years ago in a random casino. Uriel Briar was also known as a lucky man, the sole survivor of a fallen kingdom. There he was, the 18-year-old Prince of Briar, betting everything he had. Herman, the court mage, said he was impressed that Uriel was winning every time and asked how he was doing it. Uriel simply replied that he was just lucky today, not doing anything special. The other players at the table started leaving one by one after losing all their money. But Uriel shouted to double the bets. Herman warned the prince that they should leave as it would be too late if they stayed any longer. Just then, someone told Uriel he should have run while he could still walk. He asked, "Do you think you can just walk away unscathed after swindling us?" They accused Uriel of using dirty tricks to win. Uriel asked them, "Do you know who I am?" One of the men scoffed. "Considering your behavior, you're no nobleman. Are you the petty king of some backwater place?" They added that this would be even more reason to pick a fight with him, as it's always good to get on the Empire's nerves to provoke a war. Princes are no different. They're all just like their fathers. While they were talking, Uriel became so enraged that he flipped the entire table on them. They were shocked. Uriel told the trio of idiots to listen carefully. "I am Uriel Briar, the third Prince of Briar, and now you're all going to get a serious beating." After that, they were thoroughly beaten up. Later, Uriel was explaining himself to a woman. He said his father had called him for an emergency meeting, which was why he was late. He had already sent a carrier pigeon and asked if she couldn't forgive him just this once. This was Katrina Ivana Grants, the princess of the Empire. Katrina retorted that he acted as if he were the only person in the entire empire with problems. She also had to work hard to get there without anyone noticing. Uriel said he knew and apologized, explaining that with his father away, he had to be careful. He added, "What I'm about to say isn't something I can tell just anyone." Katrina asked, "Am I just anyone to you now?" No, that's not what I meant," Uriel stammered. "Then why did you give me this gift if you don't trust me? Why not give it to another woman you trust more?" she asked. She told him not to contact her again until she reached out to him first. "No, Katrina." "Wait," Uriel called out, but she was gone. He wondered, "What do I do with this woman? It's going to be really hard for her to forgive me this time." Meanwhile, someone was listening to their entire conversation. It's explained that after that day, the already unstable relationship between the Kingdom of Briar and the Empire completely shattered. The Empire stopped its simple provocations and crossed the line. The conflict between the two nations grew until the Empire finally invaded Briar. The castle was in flames, and Uriel could do nothing. The war against the Empire had begun, and of course, they were being crushed. The time that passed felt like an eternity. There were countless sacrifices, and it seemed the war would last forever. Uriel fought on the front lines, lost allies, and gave his blood and sweat to protect his territory. At that time, the man considered the most powerful on the continent, and Briar's greatest weapon was Frieren Briar. But in his absence, the Empire began to turn the tide of the war. At first, Uriel thought it was a coincidence, but he soon couldn't deny the truth behind it all. After reflecting on his past countless times during life and death battles, he came to a single logical conclusion: Katrina was the one who betrayed him. She was the one who passed on all the information. The war began as soon as he told her his father would be leaving Briar. He wanted to believe he was wrong, but Katrina's only response was a simple apology. This drove him to despair. Though exhausted and with almost no allies left, Uriel continued to fight on the battlefield, facing a large part of the enemy forces alone on the front lines. Eventually, he was completely surrounded by the Empire's soldiers. There was nothing more he could do. He would die there. When he was disarmed, he accepted his death. But someone took the blow for him. It was Rohan. He did it all so that His Highness could get out alive. The other soldiers of the Kingdom of Briar did the same. They were there to save the royal bloodline. Uriel turned his back and fled his own territory. He hid at first, but knew he couldn't stay there forever. He needed to get out and figure out what to do. He didn't know what had happened to his father, but since he hadn't returned, he was likely dead. Eventually he was found. He thought that if he died there, Briar would fall and everyone would die. "Please let me live," he begged. Uriel thought that if he died, Briar wouldn't survive. He thought of the knights who had sacrificed themselves for him, but the man who found him simply apologized. "I won't explain much," he said, "but the Empire will pay for its sins one day. The Empire's soldiers will soon step on this land, so you should flee." Uriel didn't know why that man helped him, but he knew he had to run. He had to live. He needed to have his revenge to rebuild Briar. However, that was a childish thought, a distant dream. Reality was far crueler than that. Everyone was dead, and he didn't know why all that blood had been shed. He couldn't even begin to imagine the reason for it all. He was just punishing himself, but he knew one day someone would appear and finally kill him. And that is the legend of the Prince of the Fallen Kingdom. He is looking for a place to die. He always throws himself into the most dangerous battles of all, risking everything with highly reckless tactics. The knight said that his solution was self-torture. He told Uriel that he didn't deserve an easy death. The knight knew exactly who he was, Uriel Briar, the third prince. Uriel thought that everyone who should have known about his past was now dead. The knight continued saying that everything that happened was his fault. It was all his fault, and that person was Rohan. Uriel recognized him by his voice, but he had seen Rohan die right in front of him. Rohan declared that it was Uriel's fault the kingdom fell. It was his fault that not a single heir was left to reclaim the throne. It was Uriel's fault that the entire kingdom lost its honor. Uriel thought that this ghost before him, a man who should have been dead, was about to kill him to punish him for all his sins. As he was stabbed, he thought, "Dying isn't as great as I imagined. I thought it would be a little better." He realized he was punishing himself even at the moment of his death. But in that instant, he remembered what his father had once told him: the successors of Briar never abandon their honor no matter what happens. And in that moment, he woke up in his childhood bed. Of course, this is a regression story. What were you expecting? A sad, dramatic tale like Game of Thrones. A story of death and overcoming hardship. No, my friend. This is a manhwa. What did you think? His father was beside him, asking if he was all right. He could hardly believe his son had slept for 3 straight days. Uriel thought he was seeing another ghost. His father, King Frieren Briar, was supposed to be dead. He concluded that he must have ended up in hell. It made sense for a man who had always put honor above all else. He was sure his father had lived a decadent life and ended up here too. Frieren slapped him across the face, asking, "What are you talking about, boy?" Uriel muttered, "You're still mean even in hell. You should reflect on your actions. It's not too late." Then he noticed the beautiful scenery, the falling leaves. He realized everyone was here, but they weren't. Those demons, the fires of hell, the sinners, the demons he had seen in life, they weren't there. As Uriel tried to understand what was happening before he could reach a conclusion, he fainted again. This is Uriel Briar, back at 13 years of age. At first he thought it was a dream, of course, or some kind of pre-death déjà vu, because no matter how tired he was, he never woke up. In fact, these long memories and the events of his life began to repeat exactly as they had before. Eventually, Uriel came to accept it. He had returned to the past. He had returned to the spring of the year he turned 13. He had been given another chance. Early the next morning, someone woke Uriel up just as he himself had ordered them to. It was time for his sword training. Uriel immediately jumped out of bed and rushed to change his clothes, but his maid Ina told him, "It's all right, you can take your time. You should wash your face first." Uriel remembered how sad he had been when he witnessed Ina's death. He called her name and told her, "Slap me across the face, hard." She asked, "Are you asking me to commit a crime against you?" "It's not a crime if I order it," Uriel replied. And Uriel Briar never goes back on his word. The slap was so hard that his scream echoed through the halls. Later, during his sword training, his face was still swollen. He thought, "I'd forgotten how strong that woman was." And yet, no one offered him any medicine or ointment. They just gossiped behind his back. Not even Bernard said anything about his cheek. This was his swordsmanship instructor. Uriel thought, "This old man isn't even correcting my posture. He's just making me swing my sword meaninglessly." He wondered since when Bernard had started teaching only by sparring with him. At one point, Bernard had told the king that the prince was born with a blessed talent but had apparently lost it. If he were just a little more diligent, he would have been the best swordsman in this kingdom. Uriel, who had overheard that conversation, thought, "It started then." He hadn't been very cooperative with his training, which is why it had devolved into mindless sparring without proper form or instruction. After that, instead of training harder, he only became lazier and lazier. He told Bernard, "From today on, you must teach me properly. I, Uriel Briar, will give it my all." Bernard replied, "I don't know what changed in you, but very well I understand." He then unleashed his aura. "From this moment on, this will be real training." Bernard lunged forward so fast that Uriel could barely defend himself. "Wait a minute," he shouted. He thought, "I'd forgotten this man's power." Bernard was once called the Sword Demon. His training continued for a long time, and by the end he was nearly dead on his feet. He thought, "This is real training with the Sword Demon Bernard. If I didn't have my experiences as a mercenary, I wouldn't even be able to move right now." But despite being extremely exhausting, he knew that if he kept this up, he would develop much faster. Bernard was also very impressed because Uriel, albeit clumsily, had blocked all of his blows. Suddenly, Ina appeared desperate with an emergency message. "His Majesty is looking for you. You must leave now. Count Joheim has brought his son." This put Uriel on high alert. This was the man who betrayed the kingdom, allying with the Empire and opening the gates for the enemy army to enter. The son's name was Got. Uriel thought, "That bastard is here." "Where is that scoundrel?" Uriel asked. Later, they were seated at the dining table. Uriel was calm and polite as if nothing had happened. One of the guests remarked, "The third prince has changed a lot. His physique looks excellent." King Frieren joked, "He doesn't even seem like my son. It's as if he ate something strange and completely changed." The other princes chimed in, "We want to eat that too then." Frieren turned to his guest. "My son is also quite intelligent, isn't he?" The count replied, "He has weaknesses in some areas." When the count's young son Got looked at one of the other princes, he was enchanted. But when he looked at Uriel, he nearly froze in fear because Uriel was staring at him with a deathly gaze. Kalen, the second prince, asked Uriel if something had happened between him and that boy. Uriel whispered, "Yes, That guy betrayed me, stabbed me in the back. Kalen then asked, "And are you going to let that slide? You, of all people, the third prince, Uriel Briar." Uriel thought, "This brother of mine always pretends to be so polite, so dignified and honorable, but he's been rotten from the start. He's finally showing his true colors." Uriel then thought about Got. A good beating should set this kid straight. It'll be for Got's own good, so that the past doesn't repeat itself. And now that Uriel remembered he had fought Got at this very moment in his past life, this was actually a perfect opportunity. Later, Uriel tossed a wooden sword to Got, saying, "I know you're decent with a sword." Got replied, "Yes, I have some skill, but why are you asking so suddenly?" Uriel stated, "This kingdom is no place for narrow-minded knights." Got responded, "I'm still a child. I'm not even a knight yet." Meanwhile, Kalen was watching everything unfold. "Even so, you are destined to become a knight who will serve this kingdom," Uriel said. "Yes, technically that's true," Got admitted. "That's why I'm challenging you to a duel," Uriel declared, immediately launching a brutal attack. Got managed to block the first blow, but Uriel then kicked sand in his eyes. "That's not in the code of chivalry," Got shouted. Uriel even dropped his own sword and rushed in for a brawl. With a single kick, he knocked Got down like a sack of potatoes and pinned him. He thought about his past life, how Got had sold his own father's honor and leaked information to the Empire, leading to the kingdom's fall. "Your father is a very respectable knight and a great count to this king," Uriel said to the pinned boy. "But why do you think a position like that exists? What purpose do you think it serves?" Uriel thought. "I understand Got. He just wanted to survive. But in this life, Briar will not fall." Got stammered that the question was a bit difficult to answer. Uriel thought, "There will be no more knights with weak convictions in this army, and that includes me." So he rephrased the question for Got. "Why is your father a count, and who gave him that power?" Uriel demanded. "No matter the situation you must find yourself, you must understand the essence of this. You must reflect on the words you have just heard from your prince." "All right," Got said. After he left, Callan remarked, "Not bad at all. You actually fight very well." "Did you think I was going to lose?" Uriel asked. "Yes, I did," Callan answered bluntly. "After all, you're the biggest troublemaker and gambler in the kingdom. I didn't think much of you." "I'm not going to live like that anymore," Uriel said. "I'm going to stop all that foolishness." Callan was so shocked, he asked, "Did you hit your head somewhere?" Later, as the sun was setting, Uriel was finishing his sword training. Yes, he had been there all day. Bernard said, "That was excellent work, but we can stop for today." Then he said something very serious to Uriel. "It's time for you to learn a mana method." "Are you going to teach me yours?" Uriel asked. "No," Bernard replied. "I will teach you the best method for someone of royal caliber. You will specifically learn the Briar method. It's a refined mana method in which the flow of energy is perfectly balanced. It's efficient and excellent." Uriel thought, "In my past life I mastered the Briar method. I almost reached the peak of its ability even as a mere mercenary." Bernard asked, "Are you considering something else?" "I'm just thinking," Uriel said before continuing. "Recommend someone to me. A very good person from the Royal Guard. It can be someone who isn't that skilled yet, but has exceptional potential." Uriel thought, "There's one more technique I didn't learn in my past life." Bernard thought about the person he was looking for. "If you're looking for raw potential, the best one is Jared." Uriel knew who Jared was, but only vaguely. He had met him at the end of the war in his past life. The man's skills were very mediocre. He was such a pathetic knight that it was surprising he was still alive at that point. But Jared had said, "This is so frustrating. If I could go back in time, I would train like hell." Uriel thought, that man had incredible natural talent, but he never polished the gift he received. By the time the war came, both of our swords were rusted. "Then I will go find Jared right now," Uriel declared. It was time to knock some sense into his potential knight. Later, Uriel was at the knight's training center. He said he just came to see how everyone was doing. One of them, the commander, mentioned that everyone was doing very well, working hard. Uriel thought, that's true. All of Briar's knights have always been very dedicated. But he asked specifically for Jared. The commander pointed him out. "The rookie is over there in the corner." Uriel now understood what Bernard meant. It's important to improve one's skills while training, but all Jared was doing was lifting his sword. He was barely training at all. That's why he became a rusted sword in the future. Uriel asked the commander Rosso for a wooden sword. He wanted to practice a match against one of the knights. Rosso agreed, but offered to face him himself. "No," Uriel said, pointing. "I'm going to beat that lazy one over there." Later, they were ready for the duel, with everyone, including the commander, watching. The others told the rookie to be careful with the prince. Uriel said to Jared, "I'm tired of just hearing that you have great potential as a knight. I want to see for myself what kind of knight you are." "All right," Jared replied. "Don't disappoint me," Uriel said, lunging forward with incredible speed. Jared managed to block all the ensuing blows. The onlookers commented, "Jared's movements are precise and sharp, but the prince is doing surprisingly well against him." Jared realized something was wrong. He noticed that the kid's attacks weren't normal. The distance of his strikes was too consistent. Uriel's skills were those of a person with a great deal of experience. It was as if he was matching his own rhythm with Jared's. "This is pretty boring, isn't it?" Uriel said. "This is just a basic performance. Shall we speed things up?" His blows became even more powerful, and even Jared was having difficulty blocking them, but Uriel thought, Jared is far too impressive. He managed to block. Jared's reflexes were excellent, so much so that he dodged Uriel's next blow and managed to parry those that followed. Still, it wasn't easy for him, which was unexpected coming from a child. When Jared returned the attacks, Uriel could barely block them all. Uriel thought, even with the experience of my past life, I'm still in this child's body, so I don't expect to win. But he wanted to put up a fight. He delivered a strike that almost disarmed Jared, breaking his guard. Uriel thought, I just want to land one hit, and that's exactly what he did. He struck Jared's shoulder. The other knights could hardly believe he had managed it. They said the prince was impressive. Uriel asked if Jared was holding back. No, he replied, thinking this was very strange. Jared thought he had been pressuring Uriel, so why was he suddenly being cornered by his attacks? The next blow nearly caught his neck, but he managed to dodge just in time. Jared thought, this is starting to get irritating. Then, to everyone's shock, he did something that made them ask if he'd lost his mind. Jared was using his mana method against a child, but Uriel still managed to dodge the blow. Jared then realized the gravity of what he was doing. He had even cut a bit of the prince's hair. Everyone called Jared a lunatic and asked if Uriel was all right. I'm fine, he said. Fights always end up like this. He told Jared to pick up his sword again while he tied a bandana around his small wound. Now it's getting fun, Uriel declared. There's no reason to stop now. The next exchange of blows was powerful and heavy. Jared thought, the prince is very different from me. The prince was pushing himself to his absolute limit, raising the level of the combat by using everything he had. In the midst of the fight, Jared felt his blood boil. He'd never felt this way before, not even when facing an opponent stronger than himself. He began to wear down Uriel's blocks. Jared realized that this prince so young was awakening something within him. Finally, he dodged one of Uriel's attacks, creating an opening for a counter. His downward strike was so powerful that it split the prince's wooden sword in half. It's over, Uriel said. Jared wins. To win, he had to use a mana method. I learned something from you, so I thank you, Uriel added. No, I thank you, Jared replied, thinking, I've never seen such spirit, such obsession as the prince's. How does a boy so young have all this willpower? Uriel asked. Why are you just standing there without saying anything? You made the prince bleed. Are you just going to stand there? Jared went to get something to treat the wound, and Uriel took the opportunity to collapse to the ground in exhaustion. All the knights said it was incredible. Just then, the captain approached, analyzing the situation to see what exactly had happened. This was the captain of Briar's Royal Guard, Zane, who was intrigued by what had just occurred. A few days after the incident, Jared ran into Uriel, the third prince, again. He asked Jared to accompany him, saying he had something to show him. But I need to train, Jared said. Uriel asked if he had finally fixed that mentality of his. Since it was thanks to him, he should repay the debt. All right, Jared agreed. Uriel thought, finally, Jared has some motivation in that body of his. It's still not enough, but for now, it's decent. Where exactly are we going? Jared asked. Be quiet, I'm not telling you, Uriel replied. It won't be anything dangerous. I'm even going to call someone else. He then shouted down the hall for that person, Herman, the court mage. Herman asked what exactly Uriel wanted. I need your assistance where I'm going now, he answered. Herman said he would love to accompany him, but he was a bit busy. But Uriel added, If you come with me, I'll pay off the debt you owe from our bets. Are you serious? Herman asked. Of course. I can pay off that debt from last time. Have I ever lied to you? Outside of a casino, never, Herman replied. Exactly. There you have it, Uriel said. Herman clarified. That's not what I meant. I meant I've never seen you outside of a casino. Uriel thought that sounded pretty bad, but he promised to pay the debt, so Herman just had to come with him. If that's the case, Herman said, holding up a piece of paper. Please sign this contract. Uriel was left speechless, thinking that the title of Third Prince of Briar was apparently worthless. Jared will be the witness to my words. That's why he has to come along. All right, I'll go with you, Herman conceded. But where exactly are we going? Uriel announced. I'm going to the sword in the mountain. I'm going to claim all the treasures in the ancestral dungeon. And later inside the dungeon, Herman said he didn't even know a place like this existed in the kingdom. Jared asked, What's at the end of this cave? That's where the sword in the mountain is, Uriel said. I've heard of it, Jared said. The legend of the family's progenitor. Exactly, Uriel confirmed. He thought, in my past life when the Empire took over Briar's territory. They discovered this dungeon where the sword in the mountain was. It is a sacred relic that held the entire legacy of the Briar family. At the time it was found, it caused a huge commotion. The path they were now following had only been used as an escape route, which was why this legacy was handed over to the Empire before any of the Briars even knew of its existence. But now he was no longer in a hurry. Now he knew everything. He had a second chance in this life. He would advance instead of fleeing. He would see this relic with his own eyes, the legacy of the Briar ancestors. When they passed through a dark corridor of the dungeon, they found themselves in a kind of clearing. Herman realized that this path led directly to the mountain. But where on earth did the prince get the key to this door? He wondered. Uriel thought, I'm not going to tell him. But he knew it was in the hidden study just as it had been in his past life. In the past, he had paid the price for not using the knowledge he had, but now he was taking full advantage of it. Along the way, Herman ended up getting scratched by one of the tree branches. Be careful, Uriel warned. These plants are sharp like the thorns of a rose. Just follow me closely and you won't get hurt. When Uriel got a little ahead, Herman got Jared's attention. Has the prince eaten something strange recently? I was thinking the same thing, Jared admitted. Hurry up, you two, Uriel called out. Herman muttered, His temper hasn't changed much. But then Uriel noticed something and told them to wait. There was a pack of wolves nearby. They're moving in a group. We can't even tell how many there are, Uriel said. How do you know that? Jared asked. Uriel said he'd read it in a book. Herman asked, What do you mean Uriel read a book? The wolves haven't noticed us yet, Uriel said. So just walk slowly. But of course Herman had to step on a twig, giving away their position. He started to apologize, but it was too late. As a wolf lunged at him, Jared had to, nearly getting his throat slit. Hernan almost had his head devoured. Ern said that Jared hadn't done badly at all in that exchange. However, with his attack, he drew the attention of the alpha, who was ready to kill them all, and howled to call the rest of the pack. Jared told the two to get behind him and once again imbued his blade with mana. When the wolves lunged at them, he managed to react quickly enough to kill two in a single blow. Hernan remarked that this was to be expected from a knight of the royal guard. Ernie agreed that he had many skills, but it wasn't good enough because there were still too many wolves, and Jared was already beginning to falter. Erna told Hernan that his father didn't trust his abilities, but Ern believed he might have improved. Hernan then asked if he wanted the full power of a battle mage and immediately summoned several fireballs. Jared didn't understand anything until he turned to see a fireball heading straight for him, but he managed to get out of its path just in time for it to explode on the wolves, not him. Later, they commented that they hadn't expected more monsters to appear. Even though they were delayed by everything that happened, they finally arrived. They were at the peak of Sword Mountain. Jared asked if this was really the place, as it didn't seem like there was anything there, much less a relic. But Ernie knew. He was sure this was the spot. They just weren't seeing the right thing. Then he saw a small shining stone and told everyone they had to pull it out. Hernan mentioned that this task was very difficult for a mage. That crystal was in the hilt of a sword. It was truly the sword of the mountain. Hernan said it looked like it had never been buried, appearing brand new, as if it had just come from the blacksmith. Inscribed on its blade was the word guilty. Jared asked if this was the founder's relic. Ernie said that no one could know, but suddenly the entire mountain began to tremble. Ernie said they would find out soon enough. The ground gave way, and they all fell into a huge cavern. Curiously, where they landed, there was a large crystal with a magical aura. Jared, however, was almost in tears because Ern had fallen on top of him, but he protected himself with his mana method. Ern commented that it wasn't bad. Hernan hadn't even gotten a speck of dust on him because he had floated down, saying it was much deeper than he had imagined. Ern asked if the court mage had just ignored the prince's well-being to protect himself. Hernan claimed it was an urgent situation and he hadn't thought it through. But then Hernan heard a very strange noise, and when he turned around, he saw a ghost. Erne told him not to change the subject like that, but when Erne turned, he also saw it. It was a death knight. Erne knew this very well and ordered Jared to get up. Since he was being lazy, Erne had to kick him. Jared woke up and asked where he was. When he looked ahead, he saw the death knight and fell into despair. But he drew his sword and protected the prince, saying he would deal with the death knight. Ern thought that it wasn't so bad. He had acted quite quickly. Ern thought that, as the name suggests, it is a knight who returns from the dead. When an experienced knight dies and becomes a death knight, they become even more powerful than when they were alive. But Erne said this one wasn't dangerous. He could sense the knight was only protecting the dungeon. There was no reason for it to be hostile to Ern, as he was the prince and had the blood of the dungeon's founder. Indeed, when he approached the knight, did nothing. Actually, it did draw its sword, but not to strike it, plunged the blade into the ground. Hernan said he could hardly believe his head was split in half. Erne told him to watch his mouth. Hernan corrected himself, saying he meant his hair was parted in the middle. But the Death Knight suddenly said that Ern's attitude was befitting, just like his master's. Ern asked, "Who is this person you're talking about?" The knight replied that it was Eric Briorl. Hernan said that anyone would know who that man was, the swordsman who dominated the entire continent with a single blade, the founder of the Briorls, the first king. Erna asked if since the founder he was the first to arrive here. The knight replied yes, and if he were not a descendant of Briorle, he wouldn't have even been able to pick up the sword he was now holding. Jared asked if this was then truly the treasure left by him. The knight said that he had used this sword and asked why Ernie suddenly looked that way. He said he felt a little bad for having touched it. But the knight told the descendant of Briorle to state the exact reason he had come there. He introduced himself as Ernie Briorle, the third prince of the current Briorle kingdom, and asked for the founder's legacy to be passed down to him. Hearing this, the knight simply turned and said that the time had finally come for him to fulfill his duty. He would grant Ern what he sought, and Ern followed him in silence. Jared thought that this made no sense. They had entered the founder's dungeon inside the mountain and were now talking to a death knight. Jared never imagined he would experience this in his life. But Ern asked what he was doing just standing there. Suddenly, he had a vision of his past life. He remembered talking to the prince. He thought he was now having hallucinations, seeing meaningless things. So he returned to reality and followed the prince. Then the Death Knight approached the crystal and sat right in front of it, which suddenly began to glow. The knight said he hoped this would be worth it. The next second, Ern opened his eyes in a completely different place. Besides not knowing where he was, someone was approaching. Erne wondered if it was the founder, but he thought no, that thing wasn't even human. It was a humanoid creature with no face and no color. It tried to strike Erne with its sword, and that being could also use mana, more specifically a mana method. Suddenly, the creature began to touch its chest, then its blade, as if guiding its mana. Ern realized it was showing him how to use it. Then it beckoned Ern to come and test it. The prince wondered if he was supposed to copy it in the middle of a weird fight. He thought his ancestor was surely crazy to think he would train someone who hadn't even learned a mana method yet. The founder was using one of the best training methods practice real combat. This was something only a person in their second life could do a person just like him. So he actually managed to use mana with this method. Then he got the humanoid's attention, and even with his blade imbued with mana, said he wasn't very sure how to use it, but this should be enough. Ern thought that he had to get stronger. In the near future, the Empire would become more ambitious and want to dominate the kingdom. This time, he would destroy the Empire, completely decimating it. He would not make the same mistake as in the past, and the swordsmanship of Eric Briorle would be the catalyst for it all. He would absorb it, no matter what. He began to exchange blows, both he and the creature, with smiles on their faces. Later, Jared woke up back in the castle. He was in the training center. As his hair was a bit singed, it didn't seem like a dream, but there was something hidden in the shadows, and when the being finally appeared, Jared found himself face to face with a doppelganger, a copy of himself. It was probably a test from the Death Knight. Jared asked its name. "Jared, too," the copy replied, but told him not to try to avoid his destiny. He couldn't become a royal guard because what he truly wanted was a comfortable life. It told him to stay far away from the third prince. The more he intertwined with his destiny, the more miserable his life would become. Jared took a deep breath and thought that if it were the him of the past, he probably would have agreed. But that boy had lit a fire within him. Jared said that it didn't know much because it was just a copy. A sword once thrust cannot be taken back. No matter how much you think about your attack or how you did it, the more you think, the more your mind will just become clouded. The copy said that was a very arrogant way of thinking, and also using a mana blade lunged forward. The two Jareds seemed evenly matched in power, and the real one realized this blow was not simple. Neither was taking risks because his swordsmanship was very defensive. The him of the past would have lost this, but now Jared wanted fun, not a boring and tedious combat. He struck the copy square in the chest. From the armor, no blood came out, only a disgusting sludge. When it left the armor and fled, it became a large golem. This was the creature's true identity. Jared thought this certainly had to do with that night. It must be some kind of test. And he was sure that His Highness was also in the middle of a fight and thought that the prince had to win. Meanwhile, that desert looked like a war zone. The rocks were scarred by the clash of blades, and the prince seemed defeated, sunk into one of them. The creature approached to deliver the final blow, creating a large explosion. But that explosion was actually caused by the impact of its sword against the princes who had managed to stand up at the last moment. He was wondering how much time had passed while he was inside this test. It was now much more dangerous than in the beginning, but thanks to the duel they had all this time, he had learned how to use a mana method. Now, with this body, he could use his sword well. And he noticed something: the creature was standing intact, but its sword was almost completely destroyed. In the next second, it simply turned to dust, and everything was disappearing, not just the creature, but the space they were in. Ern realized that time was up and thanked it for the lesson. He slowly opened his eyes, returning to reality. The other two were already awake. Jared was standing, and the Death Knight said they had a good dream. Ern asked, "What exactly was that just now?" The knight explained that it was a plan by Eric himself. He knew that eventually one of Briarl's heirs would appear here. But Ern thought that in his past life, Sword Mountain was completely destroyed, and because of that, no one from the Briarl family ever managed to reach this dungeon or receive the test left by their progenitor. Ernie asked if the founder used mana methods. The knight said no. This was the ultimate legacy left by Eric. Through the combination of all the knowledge he acquired in his adventures and travels, he was the first to acquire the pure method. Erna asked why exactly it was passed down this way instead of directly to the heirs. The knight said that this dungeon does not open if it is not the right time. In fact, the very fact that the dungeon opened is because it is time to use this power. And he could not answer why exactly. That is something the heir, in this case Ernie, has to discover for himself. Ernie asked what the exact name of this method was, and the knight said it is the soul rupture. The knight asked the third prince to kneel before him as he would pass on the elder's legacy. When he did so, the knight placed a hand on his head and told him to never fear any enemy, to act according to what he believes, and to fulfill the duty of the Briarlace until the end of his life. As the knight was about to disappear, he pulled Ern's hair and said to remember this very well: a Briarle never abandons their honor, even if it means their death. That is the duty of a Briarle. The next morning he was being woken up by Ina, who threw open the window right in his face. Ina said he must still be tired, having returned so late yesterday. Ern mentioned he was visiting the royal archives in the palace. Ina asked why so suddenly. Ernie explained that there was a certain document he had to find. Among all the historical documents of the family, he found a note stating that the founder had a brother, a man who cast aside his honor and was completely erased without even leaving his name behind. That man was the Death Knight he had met, and this was the story of the true owner of the sword he now held. Ina interrupted his thoughts, saying he had to change his clothes quickly. His Majesty was looking for him. She didn't know the reason, but after meeting with Hernan, his father had summoned him immediately. Erna grew worried about this. As they were leaving the dungeon, Hernan had said he would report everything that happened to his father that day. Erna had asked if that was really necessary, and the mage had replied that he thought so. So he really did it, Ernie thought. Later he was meeting with Fiore. His father told Ernie that not only had he left the palace without permission, but he had also found the founder's secret dungeon inside Sword Mountain. Eren confirmed that yes, it was by chance. His father then asked if the sword he was now using was also found there, and Erna replied yes. Fiore approached and said he had heard that his son had changed a lot in recent days. He'd heard it from Ina, from Bernard, from Soned, and now even from Hernan himself. He asked his son what had made him change so much. Erna became very nervous before answering. Fiore asked if he didn't want to speak. Erna said that wasn't it. "Then why are you so scared, so hesitant?" Fiore asked. Erna said it was because he had clenched his fist. Fiore then calmed down and told him to speak. Ernie explained that he had a dream. In this dream, he committed a very grave crime. Fiore asked his son, the third prince, what this crime was. Ernie said the crime was failing to protect Briorle until the very end. In his dream, a great war occurred and many people were massacred. He did what he could to try to win that war, but he failed. And when the kingdom fell, he fled without any honor and died a lonely, disgraced man. After waking from that dream, the necklace his mother had given him was gone, and he thought that perhaps the dream was a warning from his mother. Fiore asked what the cause of the kingdom's fall was in his dream. Ernie thought it might be a bit too early to mention the Empire now, and since he was trying to alter the future, there was a possibility the Empire wouldn't invade. So Ern said he wasn't quite sure. It was an army he couldn't identify. Fiore said that was all right. He didn't know if it was just a nightmare or truly a warning, but he was happy that his son was trying his best. Erna thought that all he was doing was just paying for his sins. Fiore said there was one more thing he needed to hear from his father and asked him to hand over his sword. It is explained that Fiore Briorle is a genius. They say he wielded a sword as soon as he could walk. He was the first in many paths and managed to write his name in the history of the continent solely through his power. At this point in the story, he is meant to be the most powerful on the continent. In other words, he is one of the most powerful swordsmen in this world. Ernie said he had never set foot in his father's personal training hall. Fiore said he had thought none of his sons had a talent for the sword. Ernie replied that he thought he was quite talented. "You think so?" Fiore asked. He then drew his own sword and asked his son what he considered talent for the sword. Strength reflexes, speed, wisdom in combat. If a person has all of this, it means they are a good swordsman, right? "Of course not," he said. "The most important thing of all is the element that makes you surpass your limits, something even more powerful than fear or a sense of justice." Then he concentrated so much power that his aura changed. His mana was a different color, and when he imbued his sword again, he said he couldn't quite explain it, that he didn't know what a proper name for it could be. Erne asked if he was talking about something like destiny. Fiore said it could be or it might not be. It depended more on him, on his interpretation. Erne thought that in his past life he was not destined to follow the path of the sword. But what about now in this life? After everything he had seen, Fiore asked his son what he thought about it. Did he think his destiny was to wield a sword? Could he hear the call of the sword his destiny? Did he think that in his moments of glory and at the moment of his death, he would be holding a sword? Ern, feeling pressured, said he didn't know. He didn't feel anything like that. But Fiore had a frightening look in his eyes, like multiple eyes staring at him, staring into Ern's soul. He remembered the traumas of his past life, that he had to flee, that he had to be the last of the Brioral territory, that he had to save everyone. He remembered the war, the death, the flames, his allies dying before his eyes. Ernie was back in the past. He wondered why Briorle was in flames. Then the enemies approached the Empire, saying, "There he is, the third prince, the last remnant of Briorle." He wondered if he was back there, back in hell. One of the soldiers lunged at him to finally kill the last prince, but he had enough reflex to block and then killed the soldier. Then the whole scene repeated, the soldiers of the Brioral territory sacrificing themselves so the prince could get out alive. He wondered if it was all just a dream. Is Brioral's destiny really to fall like this? He said he couldn't stop it. But instead of fleeing, instead of retreating, he held the sword of guilt tightly. He thought, "I have a vow. I have a duty to fulfill." He was no longer afraid of the enemies. Even surrounded by them, he had to carry the duty of Briorle to the end. So he imbued his sword with mana and killed all the enemies. No matter who appeared before him, he defeated them relentlessly, cutting off heads and killing soldiers of the Empire. But they told him he was a zombie, that he was already dead and just didn't know it yet. But Ern said, "A descendant of Briorle never throws away his honor even when facing death. I carry this duty." So he walked toward certain death without any fear, until his father's voice suddenly woke him from the trance, asking if he could hear him. The first thing Ern said when he woke up was about his army. When he looked around, he saw nothing. Fiore told him to calm down. Everything he saw was just an illusion. Ernie was still trembling and in a cold sweat. It had felt so real to him. Fiore said that in the end he was mistaken. His son was indeed an excellent swordsman. He had this duty and this talent. Ern said he had made his decision. He wondered, why did my father suddenly get so serious? Maybe he thinks his son will die as soon as he enters combat. But he told his father not to worry so much. After all, he was a genius. But what his father did next was punch the kid in the face. Later at the training center, Ern showed up to train with Bernard, sporting a lump on his head. Bernard asked, "Who created that masterpiece on your head?" Ern said it was his father. Bernard said that he went hard on him today, but that didn't mean the training would be easy. Ern said he knew. He was prepared for it. But now that he thought about it, Bernard only remained in Briorle because of his father. He asked his instructor if he stayed in Briorle because of the condition of a duel with his father. Bernard confirmed that was correct. Ernie asked if he would stay if he said he couldn't have a duel with his father. Bernard just shrugged. Ernie thought that this guy was so heartless. The instructor said, "It seems Your Highness wants me to stay. If you show me something that can convince me, I'll stay. Like, for example, the swordsmanship of your ancestor Eric Briorle." Ernie asked if he wanted him to teach him the technique of the founding king. Bernard said yes, why not? It piqued his interest. Ernie said he couldn't do that. Bernard said it didn't matter if he hadn't completely mastered it. He was already expecting that possibility. Ernie said he was right, but that wasn't the reason. The prince, using his mana, said, "This is my sword technique. It's called One with Mana, or Soul Rupture." Bernard said he had never heard of anything like that. Mana methods were usually made to enhance other sword techniques. Ern explained that was why he couldn't teach Bernard. He would only get half of the content. The instructor said that was fine by him. Even if it was only half a technique, he would stay in Briorle as long as Ern taught him. He could achieve a great result even with just half. Ernie thought that this man was confident, but that was a good thing. He said, "It's a promise then, okay?" After that, they would begin training. Bernard asked him to demonstrate the technique, and of course that meant fighting against him. But Bernard said there was one last thing he hadn't mentioned. "I was going to stay in Briorle anyway. His Majesty wants me to work for him for another 10 years. Ern was furious about this. Bernard asked, "Aren't you going to attack me? Then I'll go first." Erna was still trying to recover from that backstab he had just received, and he charged forward, extremely angry, asking, "You're telling me this now?" As the sun was setting, he was resting in his room. He realized that the future was changing. A different future from Briorle falling. The fact that Bernard was staying in Briorle, even though he hadn't done anything significant or achieved any accomplishments, was proof of this. Of course, changing the future was an overwhelming responsibility, but he would change it little by little this time. He will stop the Empire no matter what. Then another person spoke up, agreeing. Ina said that no matter what this time, he couldn't get into trouble. Ernie stood up asking, "Why do I have something to do?" Ina asked if he didn't even know. She was saying this because every day he gets into a different kind of trouble. She mentioned this because he has a meeting tomorrow, a Senate meeting. His Majesty said that Ern would have to participate this time. He hadn't been informed. Ernie complained that this sucked. Ina said it was in the morning and she heard that almost all the senators would be attending. She held Ern's hand tightly and said she was sure they could be intimidating and a bunch of annoying old men, but pleaded with him not to punch any of them in the face, please. Ernie said it was okay and told her not to worry because he didn't act like that anymore. He promised he wouldn't do anything of the sort. But the next morning at the Senate meeting, he thought that Ina was right. He really wanted to punch this guy. This was Duke Jatari. He said it wasn't right for the prince to learn a mana method that hadn't been approved yet. Ernie thought that, like everyone else, they should be discussing the management of the kingdom, but apparently it had turned into a place where the king's authority was challenged. Now he understood why his father didn't want to participate in this. Jatari said it would be much better for the prince to learn the Brioral method. One of the senators asked, "What do you mean an unapproved method? It was the founding king who invented this method." But Jatari asked how he could be so sure. The senators said that now he was doubting the prince. Jatari claimed he was just concerned about what his future would be. Ernie asked if they had created this whole discussion just to decide which mana method he should use. He told Duke Jatari that he was truly moved by this, but he thought that in his past life, Jatari was a traitor who hid behind the empire. This man's words were worthless. Jatari turned to Captain Saned and asked what he thought about this matter. The captain said he couldn't draw any conclusions yet. Every mana method has its pros and cons. Additionally, it depends on the individual's variations. Jatari said that even the captain of the Royal Guard was uncertain about it. This method was too risky. It was better for him to give up such a dangerous method and use the one everyone else uses. Another senator said that Saned hadn't said that. He had only stated facts, not given an opinion. But then another senator who was supporting Jatari said it was the same thing. He said Duke Jatari was just worried about the prince. The senators were staring each other down, and Ern wondered what they were thinking because to him this wasn't looking good. Two of them agreed with Duke Jatari. He had orchestrated a plot among the senators. Erne thought that he was gaining the upper hand in this place. It's explained that if you've only recently started practicing a mana method, there's still enough time to switch to another. However, because of what he experienced in the fight against the Death Knight and its illusion, the soul rupture had already ingrained itself into his mana core. But he thought he couldn't explain everything. He had to omit some facts and didn't know exactly what to say. Until a senator said that his words were very convincing, but he didn't think they were enough. That's why he wanted to say something too. He asked how many of these old geezers at the table had ever fought one. This was Baron Cassius Arentel. The senators in the plot wondered who this guy was who was ruining everything, and Jatari himself didn't know exactly who he was. He introduced himself as Cassius Arentel, a free baron. Jatari wondered if a baron could even be at this table with senators. Cassius said that honestly he didn't want to come either, but what could he do? It was Count Cid himself who sent him here. Ern recognized that name. He is the guardian lord of the Brioral frontier, who has lived most of his life on the battlefield. He is famous for being a true soldier, loyal to the territory. He is also famous for never participating in noble events. He always sends a representative, and he even sent one to the senators' meeting. They asked why exactly he was sent to the Senate. Cassius said that Cid didn't explain exactly, but now that he was seeing several nobles playing at being politicians here, he could finally understand why Cid sent him and didn't come himself. Types of mana or methods make no difference on the battlefield. The Empire's method. Briorli's the elders, it doesn't matter. In the end, what really matters is the user. Cassius asked what the prince thought of this. Ern said, "As the third prince of Brioral, I honestly don't see why mastering the founding king's method is controversial. Even with everyone's objections here, I will continue to learn the same method." Cassius said that if the prince himself has decided to follow the paths of the founder, who are they such irrelevant people to be against it? The things they said are things that people who have never even held a sword in their life say. This time, Ern even had to hold back his laughter. Jatari said those words were insulting. Cassius apologized, saying his family really lacked some etiquette. When you fight orcs every day on the frontier, you lose a bit of that stuff. But he asked the question again how many of them had faced an orc in their lives. Everyone fell silent. Cassius asked the senators if they thought the monsters cared about what mana method the knight was using. The senator next to Jateri said that even if he accepted his argument, the prince was still too young and might not make the right decision. Ern asked if it was worth it just because of one wrong decision of his to abandon the current method he was already training in and start another completely revising his training. He asked if the senator even knew that doing so was impossible. Cassius said it seemed the prince was not going to change his mind. So what were the senators going to do? Forcibly remove the mana method from his core? The senator said that wasn't what he meant. Cassius asked, "Then what's the point of this whole issue?" The prince agrees, doesn't he? Ern was starting to like this guy. He continued saying they could be discussing really important matters, but no, they were sitting here stressing out for nothing. It seems the people in the royal capital have a lot of free time. Jateri got stressed, asking, "What do you mean free time? That's very rude." He said the frontier had been very quiet these last few days. Cassius asked if quiet to him meant thousands of people dying every day. It seems Jateri has no idea what's happening right now. All the daily reports of soldiers dying so he can sit there enjoying his money and nobility. On the same day I left, 4 men died and I had to cover the bodies of my friends who had breakfast with me every day. He told these nobles that the orcs never rest. They only live to fight, kill, and slaughter. Then the group became very quiet with nothing to say. Ern was now thinking about the orcs. Now that Cassius was mentioning this story so much, he remembered there was a border problem with the Duchy of Klein. When Briorel and Klein went to war, the orcs took advantage to invade the territories, causing significant damage. Erna asked Cassius if their movements had changed. Cassius replied that yes, they had been a bit suspicious lately. Erna asked, "And what about the Duchy of Klein?" Erna asked if part of Klein's army wasn't also stationed at the border. Cassius said that actually those forces had recently retreated. Ernie asked, "How are the border cities? Are they in danger?" Cassius said yes, completely devastated. The people who didn't die became slaves. The situation there was terrible. Ernie thought that something had gone wrong there, maybe a civil war. He said that maybe the Duke's 3rd son had caused problems. Then the people got a little confused by what he said. Ernie realized he had spoken aloud and said he believed that was enough for today's meeting. But Jatari tried to say something before he left. Ernie interrupted him, saying that more important than discussing which mana method he would use, they should be discussing much more important things like Klein or the threat of the orcs. He told him to stop acting like a rebellious teenager with anger issues. Meanwhile, in an inn in the territory, Cassius was contacting his lord through a communication device. Cassius said the rumors that the 3rd prince had completely changed were true. He said the kid seemed good. The lord said it was worth investigating him then and told Cassius to stay on his tail to investigate thoroughly if necessary. Cassius said okay, he would obey these orders. The lord said he would contact him again soon. When Cassius ended the call, he remarked that it was quite peaceful here. He was too used to that life of massacres on the frontier. Then he noticed a hooded person passing through the streets and wondered if it was the 3rd prince. Cassius thought something was wrong. At night it was indeed the prince hooded along with Hernan. Hernan said that as he requested, they had found a much more hidden place. He said his heart was pounding very fast. He used to love these nocturnal escapes when he was younger. Hernan admitted he was quite delinquent back then, but he said that nowadays he has a reputation to uphold. Erne said if he wanted to leave, he could go. Hernan said no, he couldn't be left alone here. But going out with a prince like this, it seemed like he was rebelling against the kingdom. So what seemed worse in this story? But he asked where exactly they were going. Erne said they were going to the casino, the largest illegal casino in this capital. Hernan asked, "What's that?" Hadn't he said he had stopped with these bad things? Ernie said he wasn't going to do anything bad. He didn't even explain what he was going to do. He asked if Hernan knew where it was. He didn't know, but he explained that he wasn't going there to gamble. This was all for the good of Briorle. Hernan asked if he was serious. If he wasn't going to be punished for this, then fine, he would guide him to the casino. He seemed much happier with this idea of the casino than he should have been. Ernie remembered that in his past life among the people of Briorle, there were always those who caused the biggest stirs. Like the mustachioed man full of money who was also involved with the criminal underworld. The business titan who created the most successful merchant guild on the entire continent. And finally, the infamous legendary assassin who took the position of the underworld leader and instilled fear. And the one who was killed by this assassin, the current great leader of the underworld, Goryo. He said it was an honor to have such an esteemed guest as the prince in his establishment. Ernie said he presumed they knew who he was. Right, Goryo said, of course, the royal court mage and the third prince visiting him personally. Even he had to receive them personally. Ernie said yes, it was a very wise decision, especially since he wasn't here to gamble, and Goryo knew that very well. Goryo told them to sit down and have a conversation. And later, Hernan asked, "What do you mean they're not here to gamble?" He hadn't told him that. But Ernie told him to be quiet. Goryo then said, "So you didn't come to gamble. Perhaps you want to borrow money." Ernie said that actually he wanted to invest money. Goryo noted, "Perhaps you're trying to create your own private fund, aren't you? The fact that you're saying this to me, the king of this place's underworld, instead of the capital's bank, makes me think you're aiming for something very high, aren't you?" But Ernie said that was enough interrogation. It wasn't part of the job, was it? Goryo agreed that was true. It was rude of him. Ernie told him not to worry. In the end, he was the one who would receive the funds here. Goryo said to get straight to the point and asked what exactly he wanted to use these funds for. Ernie said that with the money he borrowed from him, he would buy Mugranja, the spice from the Klein region. He knew that soon the demand for it would become enormous. Hernan asked, "Why this so suddenly from the prince? Is he crazy?" Goryo confirmed that Mugranja is indeed an essential ingredient for making luxury fragrances, but he asked if it was really worth investing so much capital in it. He honestly had some doubts. Ernie said he had already said it, but the demand would rise. Hernan thought that he knew the Klein territory was having problems with orcs and cities being taken over, but to him, that alone wouldn't increase the price. Was Ernie just trying to secure a regional specialty before others? With the look the prince had on his face, it didn't seem like he was making an irresponsible decision in any way. It seemed like everything was thought out. Goryo thought that this boy was no longer the same Prince Ernie from a while ago. He seemed to really know what he was talking about. Ernie said to decide on the numbers, then the quantities as an investor and not as a prince. How much could he borrow? Then Goryo made sure to get everyone out of the room, and he made Ernie sign a promissory note. Later, after they left, Hernan could hardly believe he had borrowed money from Goryo. He told Ern that it was very unfair. Hernan hadn't had any fun in this story. Ernie hadn't even pretended to gamble. Ernie said that if he had told him the truth before, he would have told everything to his father, and he knew it was true. At that moment, they were on their way to the Merchant Guild. Erna thought that actually Mugranja was already a guaranteed profit item at the moment, and the only alchemist who really knew how to produce it was very close to Klein. But he would be killed in the Civil War. Later, a substitute would have to be made for the market, and the pure original Mugranja would greatly increase in price. He couldn't entrust this to just any random person. They were standing in front of a hovel. Ernie said this was the place. But Hernan could hardly believe it. He said this place was horrible, terrifying, gloomy. But Ernie knocked on the door, asking if Elaine Wood was there. Hernan told His Majesty to wait a bit. He should leave things like this in the hands of the guild. Elaine asked who exactly he was. "I am Elaine Wood." Erne introduced himself as the third prince of Briorle and said he wanted to entrust a task to her. Later, Hernan asked if he had gone completely mad. Ernie said that he certainly spoke his mind freely with the prince, didn't he? Hernan said that anyone would say the same thing, that he was crazy. He asked how Ernie could entrust so much mugranja to a failed business like this. Ernie thought that she might be failing at this moment, but it wouldn't take long until Elaine rose and became known throughout the continent. She would be the head of a merchant guild with potential never seen before. And unlike Goryo, who hides behind the illusion of trust, Elaine treats promises to clients as sacred. In his past life, she was a legendary merchant, and this time he would make her surpass the mythical level. She would be a legend. Hernan asked if that was enough for today. Wasn't it? Ern said. No, there was one more thing. He was already heading down another super dark and suspicious alley. Hernan asked where he was going. Ernie thought that the good and bad sides of the underworld would soon join him. He just needed to convince one more person. Later in the city's slums, where the homeless and those who would kill for a piece of bread were found, Ernie finally found the person he was looking for. He approached a girl and introduced himself as the third prince of the territory. He thought, this is the assassin who cruelly killed Goryo in my past life, the only surviving member of an order of assassins, Zana. Zana asked what exactly a prince was doing there. Ern said she didn't need to be so on guard with him. He only came because he thought he could help. He asked Hernan to hand it over at once. He then gave her a bag full of money. Ernie noticed a child behind Zana. He remembered that in his past life, Zana had borrowed a large amount of money from Goryo precisely to treat this child's illness. But the moment she made that deal, her life was ruined. She followed the path of assassinations, but was eventually recognized for her skills. Ernie's goal was to prevent that from happening. Ernie told Zana to take this money and take the child to the temple to be treated. Zana asked what exactly he wanted, what he wanted in return. The prince said he wanted one thing, for her to remember who he was and what he had done. Then he left with Hernan, who asked why he gave a bag full of money to a beggar like her. Ernie said it was just an investment for the future. He had made connections with the 3 people he needed. He would need help from all of them in the future. Now there was one last thing he needed to do, so he asked for another favor from Hernan. He asked what exactly Hernan had seen there in the Founder King's tomb. Hernan said he saw gambling, lots of gambling. He played a game in the casino where his life was the bet. Cool, right? Ernie thought this was worrying, but he told Hernan to keep everything that happened today a secret. Okay. But the next morning he was making his report to the king, who said he had heard that Hernan went out with Erna last night and asked what had happened. Hernan said he was convinced by the third prince to leave the palace with him. Then they went straight to the casino, the biggest casino in the capital. Fiore asked if he gambled there, and Hernan said yes, that was all he did. Hernan said the prince was terrible at playing cards, so he lost all the money he had. Hernan thought about everything that happened afterwards. He took money from Goryo, gave it to a merchant, and also to a beggar. He couldn't just tell this to the king, especially since he had promised to keep the secret. Hernan said the prince had walked the streets to see how people lived. He was interested in seeing how everyone lived. Fiore asked if he returned after that, and Hernan said yes, that was all. Fiore became very thoughtful about it. He asked if Hernan would go to the ball, to which he replied, yes, he would. Fiore said he thought he wasn't so interested in that. Hernan said that people change their minds, right? He said it had been a long time since he last danced. The next morning, there was Ernie back at it, getting beaten by Bernard during his training. Ernie said that Bernard was very popular because the maids couldn't stop looking at him. Erna said there would be a ball. Maybe one of them would want to invite him. He already had a guaranteed partner. But Bernard said he wasn't very interested. But returning to the main topic of training the sword technique, he said Ern was right. There was no decisive form in this technique. Erna said he had warned him. It was just about moving according to the flow of mana. Bernard said it was very difficult to understand. He would have to see it in a real fight or study it much more deeply. But anyway, the third prince was progressing very quickly in his training, and his mana was great. To be honest, Bernard said he was surprised. He didn't think Ernie would do so well with mana like that. Ernie thought that he felt a little guilty about it because he was trying to erase the Brioral method he had learned in his past life. But all Bernard said was for him not to rush. Bernard was a little worried because he was going too fast. He had already reached a very high level for his age. But maybe his child's body couldn't keep up. His body wasn't developing as fast as he was. Ernie said he would keep that in mind. He would maintain a good balance. He said they could continue with the training, but now he wanted to use real swords. He thought that he didn't care. He wanted to get strong and fast. Bernard said that was fine. Erna asked about a little bet if Ern managed to hit him in this duel, he would have to go to the ball with someone. Bernard said no, he would win anyway, and Ern would probably back out of the bet if he lost. Ern said they would see then, and using his mana went very quickly towards Bernard. And it was good he really didn't beat Bernard in the end. A few days later, the day before the ball, a carriage was arriving in the territory. Inside it were two blonde people. The man is the second prince of the empire, Jair de Ravama, who said she hadn't taken her eyes off the window since she arrived. And this is Ekaterina de Ravama, the princess of the empire. She said there was someone she really wanted to meet. At night, Ern was getting ready in his very formal clothes for the ball. He said this outfit had too many decorations. He was too flashy. Ina said she thought he looked great and that he always liked this kind of thing. Then she finished getting him ready. But Ern asked her about the dance. He invited her to dance a little to practice, besides the fact that he had no one else to do it with. Ernie asked, "What's that expression on your face?" Ina asked if he wasn't going to step on her foot on purpose, was he? Ernie said of course not. He wasn't doing that. And when he pulled her, he told her to follow his pace. Ina asked if he was kidding her. She was actually a good dancer, you see. Ernie asked who she had danced with so much in this life. Ina said she was very popular in her village but had never danced with someone so short before. Ernie told her to just wait and see. He would grow and she would bite her tongue. She had just stepped on his foot. She said she had made an innocent mistake. Then she stepped on it again and said they were mistakes. Later at the ball, everything was very beautiful and elegant. The king of Briorle Fiore was observing everything from his throne, especially his 3 sons. Until Erne noticed that Count Cid was here too. Last time it had only been his representative, Cassius Arantel. But now he was there too. Then Ernie noticed something. The first prince had glasses resting on his clothes. He asked if his brother's vision had worsened and if he had started wearing his glasses more. But the prince said it wasn't that bad to the point where he had to worry. Then an announcement was made because a very important person was entering the ball, and this was Jair, the second prince of the empire. Fiore, of course, went personally to greet him, thanking him for coming. Jair said he was the one who appreciated the invitation and that he had even come with his sister. When Ekaterina introduced herself, Ernie was fascinated by her beauty, of course, just like in the past. But those dreams, this beauty, this love, all broken. He thought that he couldn't get close to Ekaterina anymore, not after what happened. He wouldn't make the same mistake. Okay. Ekaterina seemed interested in him. Later, people were mingling and talking. Ern thought, as expected of Cedric, he had already found a partner to dance with. In fact, he found many partners. He was very benevolent, dancing with every woman he could, and everyone was fawning over him. Compared to that guy Ernie only had. Ekaterina, then the second prince, invited her to dance. Ernie thought he was a loser, who would want to be with someone like him. Until Ina approached with a cookie to cheer Ern up a bit. Ernie asked if it wasn't too tiring serving at the ball. Ina said that compared to taking care of him, it was very easy. Ernie said he wanted lots and lots of cookies. Ina said if he wanted more, he just had to call her. Ernie became thoughtful about all of this until his thoughts were interrupted by Jair. Ernie knew very well who this guy was, Jair de Ravama Grayson. He had commanded the troops at the King of Briorle's palace. But Ern introduced himself politely to him, as if nothing had happened, though he still hated this man even while maintaining a calm exterior. But Jair said he knew who he was, and just his gaze made Ernie nervous, as if Jair wanted to extract something from his mind. Jair noted he was 13 years old, wasn't he? As expected of a son of Fiore, he said he had a lot of talent. Ernie thought this guy was already testing and threatening someone he had just met. He knew Jair was still young, but he still couldn't believe he was already at this level of power. Ernie thought they were both cursed. At that moment, Ina ended up dropping the tray, soiling Jair's cape. She cried out that it was the symbol of the kingdom. What a disrespectful thing. All Ina could do was apologize. Jair turned and said, "This child looks she made a mistake. According to the rules of the crown, the punishment is death." Erne thought this bastard did this on purpose to Ina. Jair said the law had decided. Fiore appeared asking if he was going to interrupt his ball. "If you want to see blood like this, do it in your own land." Jair sincerely apologized. He said the empire and the kingdom of Briorle had respected each other until the present moment. Fiore said yes, but it seemed Jair didn't want to respect them, did he? He asked if he remembered Gotencha when Fiore himself had executed a knight of the empire. Jair said they had respected his honor and he had not taken responsibility for the act he committed. Jair said not to get into that subject for the good of both nations. Ernie thought that in the past his father had killed a knight of the empire, and if this subject was brought up again, it meant his honor was at stake. Jair promised there wouldn't be much blood. Erne thought that stopping Jair at this moment would be to challenge the empire. Even with all that holding him back, his needs, conditions, ideals, and reality, reason, and power in the end, a Briorle never abandons their honor no matter what. That is the oath of the Briorles. Erne told Jair that she was his maid, so anything she did wrong he had to punish, not the prince. Because he was also a prince and had to consider his authority. Erne thought that in the past he was a criminal and life was his sentence. He never had a choice to begin with. But now he did. Jair said that instead of executing her, he would challenge him to a duel. This made Jair burst into loud laughter. He asked if the boy's name was Ern, wasn't it? Everyone at the ball was very shocked by this. Jair, speaking to His Majesty, said he was thinking of accepting the third prince's suggestion and asked if it was okay with him. Fiore, though tense, agreed. Jair said he would have to fight, but he would get a representative for the sake of his dignity. He would take the youngest person from the royal guard because Ern was still very young. Jair said he would see him soon then. When Ernie approached Ina, he said she could get up now. She could go rest in her room. But Ina asked how she could after what he did. Erna told her not to worry about him, and the other maids took Ina to the dormitory. On his way back to the ball, Ernie ran into Ekaterina. Ernie thought this was useless to him now, so he turned and walked in the opposite direction. Later, walking through the dark corridors, he passed one of his brothers who asked what he was thinking at that moment. Ernest said he couldn't just let Ina die, could he? The prince said his little brother was just too kind, wasn't he? Ern thought it had been a while since he had received such affection from his family. The first prince asked if he wanted help in this case. The person he would fight against would surely not be as weak as Jair promised. Ern said yes, he knew, and he knew his brothers were worried about him. The prince said then there was no need to explain. He would take care of it. Ern said he didn't need to. He started this so he would finish it, although he knew his brother did everything to resolve things when he was dedicated to it. He said he trusted Ern. Erna asked about the ball. The first prince said it was a mess. He could rest. Erna thought that in his past life, if Briorle hadn't fallen, he was sure the first prince would have been a great king. And in this life, he would be able to see what kind of reign his brother would have. He would fight so he could see it no matter what. He would fight for a better future. The next morning, Ernie was ready for his duel. The people who were at the ball were all watching. Hernan said the third prince was having a duel and asked, "What does the captain think of this? Soned said the opponent's energy was very stable. He was very adept with the sword, despite not being a knight yet. The Imperial Guard was definitely very skilled. Soned was a little worried about but Hernan was smiling broadly and said to take a look. Erna was stretching with the greatest tranquility in the world. Hernan said there was no need to worry because Erna wasn't worried. And it's explained to us about the Great Mage, a rank that no one has managed to reach to this day. One of the ranks given by the Magic Tower only obtained by those who can find the origin of magic. Among these spells, there is one that can take a peek at someone's destiny, and the destiny of the world called the Fate-Revealing Magic. And in this world, only Hernan will reach this level. But Hernan at that moment saw himself losing money to a child. It was the first time he was losing money after having obtained that spell. He wondered if it was simple coincidence or if Ernie could simply read the opponent's entire hand. The guy was just very good. Hernan couldn't read anything about this boy's destiny. The only thing he saw was the illusion of Sword Mountain. Hernan could see a black-haired boy who grew up and carried the symbol of the Briorles with him. And despite the bloody fights, massacres, and everything he went through, he continued to wield his sword against the enemies. Then the vision ended, collapsing in despair. Hernan saw all this and this story that previously seemed like just a coincidence, all revolved around a single point. However, after observing all the prince's recent actions because he had changed his personality a bit, Hernan, after all this, became convinced that his spell really could be used on the boy. The only problem was that Prince Ern was a person without a destiny, and that was why he was smiling. There was no need to worry. Ern said he was ready and asked for how long the little knight would be swinging his sword in the air. "Are you swatting flies?" Jair asked if he didn't want more time to prepare. Ern said he was always ready. Then the other knight also said he was ready. Then Fiore himself would start and be the judge of this duel. They prepared for a few seconds, and when the duel began, the one who was agile enough was Ern, who not only hit the knight, but also drew his blood. Then they began to exchange heavy blows. The knight, despite being able to retaliate, did not land a very impactful blow on Ernie, and now he had a small cut on his face. But Fiore suddenly called for Hernan and asked what he thought would happen. Hernan, observing the entire duel, saw that Erne was receiving many blows, but also returning them. He was determined. Despite the injuries, he continued. Hernan said that, honestly, he didn't know. Fiore said that Hernan himself had said that his arrival in Briorle was guided by the heavens, hadn't he? He asked if it was perhaps time for him to leave this territory. Hernan said that actually no. Fiore said it was good that he wasn't leaving. Hernan said he was the one who was flattered to be so well received, a mage like him. But Fiore warned that excessive modesty could bring bad luck. Hernan asked who he thought was stronger, the knight of the Imperial Guard with his heavy sword and penetrating eyes, or Ernie. Fiore said he thought the opponent was more powerful. Hernan said he thought so too. He thought that when he came to Briorle, it was purely because of the divine signs that brought him here. He knew that the one who could change the destiny of this world was the most powerful person on the continent sitting right next to him. But his sword had not been drawn, which meant there was no reason for him to stay in this territory. Hernan said he honestly thought he would have to leave Briorle, but now seeing this duel he thought that time had passed. He would stay. And when Erne seemed defeated, he gripped his sword even more firmly and said that was enough to test his opponent. Now he would end this at once. The opponent realized he had suddenly become very fast, and Ern's attack almost cut his throat. The knight thought he would die at that moment, and everyone was very shocked by what followed. Even the captain was dumbfounded. They could hardly believe that he had turned his sword at the exact moment. What was cut was not the knight's neck, but his sword. Erna had disarmed him. This was the end of the duel. And when the knight admitted he had lost this duel, everyone celebrated for the third prince of Briorle. and Hernan thought that the signs were right. He met someone who was worth it. Life turned into death. Death turned into life at the tip of the third prince's sword. The destiny that had already been given changed along with this boy. Now every step he takes is challenging the will of the heavens, challenging fate. Hernan thought that Erna was a person outside of this world's destiny. He had transcended the bonds of fate. Hernan applauded Ern on his feet, saying he was incredible. He thought that he really didn't know what would happen, but he knew this boy would change the destiny of this world. Then 5 years passed after this event. A maid thought she could do all this quickly and easily, but how could she do so many things assigned to her at the same time? If someone caught her running here, she'd be screwed. And that's exactly what happened. The prince asked if she was new here. The maid realized it was one of the princes. With that face, she had to think about what they had taught her. She thought he had a mean face, that penetrating gaze, and those heavy steps. It must be the third prince. The maid said, I have something to do. And the prince asked if she didn't have some kind of manual in which she learned how to work here. Doesn't it say there that you have to avoid the royal path? He said he would educate her today. But then someone called for his brother. The maid thought she knew who this person was, wearing refreshing, calm clothes, always carrying a sword. She thought this is the real third prince, and Ern asked if his brother was bothering another maid. Later, he was eating some delicious cookies. That time he confronted his brother, he replied that he wasn't bothering anyone, and to thank him, the maid gave him these cookies. Indeed, it was a very delicious reward. But Ern thought about important things now. He had already reached the realm of the unarmed, the state in which a mana method user doesn't even need a sword to be a threat, creating a thick layer of mana around their own body. And Ernie had already reached this level. He thought that it had been 5 years since his regression after being killed by Lohan's sword. Soon his peaceful days would be over, and they were probably talking a lot about him now. Later, he was knocking on the door of a place where a very fervent discussion was taking place inside. Even the guard was worried. The guard said that Erna was being ignored because the people were very focused on that conference, and he suggested that the prince knock another time. But no, he broke down the door using his mana method. Ernie apologized for overdoing it. He knocked first, nobody heard, so he knocked a little harder. The guard asked if he called that knocking on the door. Ernie told his father he wanted to join the conference. So he sat down at the table as if nothing had happened and as if no one was feeling the breeze from the door he had broken. One of the senators resumed the topic that was interrupted earlier. He said they didn't have enough soldiers to help the Allied forces. They said then that they would ignore the Empire's request. This was extremely irresponsible. If they broke the relationship they had with the Empire, it would get even worse. So they went back to arguing with each other. Ern thought that everyone was considering the gains and losses. Erna thought that the timeline was following its course. It was very close to the incident that happened in his past life. The Empire had called them to be part of the Allied forces, requiring troops from each nation so that all territories would attack the orcs at the same time, launching a massive orc attack on the territory to the south. However, in his past life, this went very wrong. The orcs got completely out of control and became a threat not only to the nation that was destined for this threat, but also to all the others. All except the Empire. Curious. So he realized that everything was orchestrated by the Empire from the beginning, and in this process they lost very important people. This included Liam. And one of the senators there was Liam Flandre. But Ern would not let this happen in this life. One of the senators said they wouldn't send anything, period, and the other asked if they were starving. If you don't have any knights, send at least one troop. But Erna told everyone to shut up. He said he himself would go. He would join the Allied forces. In this way I will show the sincerity of the Brioral territory. This is our duty as nobles as well in the name of Brioral. Fiore thought that this was a move now. His son had impressed him. Later, the second prince appeared to interrupt Ern's training, asking if it was true that he was going to join the Allied forces. He said that royalty had no business setting foot there, but Ern always said it was his duty as royalty to do this for his people. The prince said, okay, today he finally understood his brother's mindset. Ern asked, just now. The prince told him to come back safe. In the meantime, he would protect the palace. Then he ran off. Ern said he would be happy if he didn't cause any trouble. Ern asked if Bernard wasn't worried about him. He said that if Ern didn't do anything too irresponsible, he would come back in one piece, so no. Ern thanked him for his generous evaluation, but Bernard, now speaking seriously, told him to be careful. The orcs were very difficult to deal with. They could be much more powerful than imagined, especially if he saw an orc with an army behind it and a flag. They were called orc lords. They were particularly fierce, strong, and merciless in wars. Ernie told him not to worry. He had his ways. Bernard asked if he already had a plan in mind, until Ina appeared, even more worried than the second prince. But it was actually a guest who had appeared. Ernie told Bernard that of course he had a plan. He always did. And this time it was a very special one. In the guest room waiting for Ernie was Guillermo, the vice president of Elaine's merchant guild. Guillermo said she was currently on a trip, so she couldn't be here. He was here as a substitute. Ernie asked if that woman was still going on trips by herself and told her to take a break from it. Guillermo said she felt good doing it. Then he said he came for a very specific reason not to talk about her. He had obtained the item he mentioned last time. Ernie said Guillermo had done an excellent job. He thought I finally got Elementarion. Guillermo asked if it was really that valuable. To him it just looked like some decorative daggers, but Ern said it was highly valuable. These were artifacts imbued with ancient magic. Guillermo was completely terrified when he saw the dagger moving. It was like telekinesis. Erne told him not to worry. He was the one controlling it. Guillermo asked if he was really moving the daggers with his mana. He didn't know Ern was so strong. Erne asked, "What do you think?" "That I sit here all day with my butt in the air." Suddenly he felt something strange, but said it was nothing and continued the conversation. He told him to send a message to Elaine saying he said hi, asking how she was. Ernie also said that next time he wanted the report from the branch in the Empire. He wanted as much information as he could get from there. Guillermo said of course. Then he asked for permission to leave. Erne told that presence that it could now leave whenever it wanted. And it was Zana, the assassin, hidden in the shadows. Ern asked what happened with Goryo. Zana said she sent him a warning just as Ernie had asked. The message was right at his bedside. Now he must be a little terrified. Ernie said that was a good one. He keeps trying to take Elaine's money. It's good that he's been warned. But Zana asked if he was really going to join the Alliance army. Erna said yes, he would. Zana said, "Please be careful." Erna said she said that as if he were going alone. Erna said she was going with him. "You can do that, can't you? You'll have to keep up, and I'm not going slow." Zana said that anywhere is where she comes from, so they would get in touch later. A few days later, it was the day he would depart for combat. Everything the first. The prince said to him was to be careful. Erne said not to worry. He was invincible. The image of Briorle would be stamped on everyone's faces. He said it was his brother who should take a break from studying, otherwise his eyesight would get worse. Then they hugged tightly, and Ernie told his brother, "Don't worry, I'll be back." And when the horn was blown, Fiore proceeded with the ceremony. The first to ascend the altar was Erne. Fiore asked if he was nervous, and the prince replied, no. But behind him was a good crowd. All the soldiers he was seeing now were precious lives that he had to carry on his shoulders. Erne thought it was impossible for everyone to return alive. However, he would fight so that they wouldn't have a painful death like in his past life. Fiore asked if he was sure he could do this. If he thought he could, then he should endure this. And the king used his killing intent. Ern felt a lot of pressure on his body. He could barely move. Instinctively, he knew what this was, death slowly approaching him. He thought, "I'll die if I try to dodge this, but I can reject it in a way." So he imbued his entire body with his mana and blocked his father's blow with everything he had. The king said he had done an excellent job. Fiore said this replaced the departure letter and told his son to be sure to come back alive okay. Then Ern raised his sword to his army, presenting himself as the third prince of Briorl, who would lead them all to victory. And now was the beginning of the march of the Briorl territory. Meanwhile, in a dark, gloomy chamber, there was an orc trapped in a cell, revolting. Sid said they would meet again after 5 years. He was curious to see how the third prince would fare. Later, we see a break they made on the way to the territory they had to reach. The people were drinking, eating, and Ern said it was too quiet, strangely quiet. He asked Raymond how far they had come. Raymond said they had already reached the entrance of Sid's domain. A little further, and they would reach the first city, the border city of Sid. After that, they had to pass through a valley and follow the dunes to the meeting point in Bado. Erne said their current speed should be good, and Raymond agreed it should be enough. Until before him, the shadow of his past appeared that zombie Roland Flandre, better known as Lohan, the one who killed him in his past life. Roland said it was an incredible honor to finally meet him. He knelt before the prince and said he had something he really wanted to say to the prince. Erna asked what exactly it was. Roland said he admired him very much since that incident 5 years ago. The third prince had become his idol. His father had told him everything. "You raised your sword to save your own maid. That was so good. That is an example of a true knight." Erna was even embarrassed, and that was difficult to see. He told Roland that yes, he knew his father, Sir Liam. "But now we can go right." Roland said he didn't come for his father. It was an honor to serve him. Until Raymond said it was time to leave. And just so he knew, Sid was not exactly known for being a very friendly person. If he didn't receive the Briorl troops with much friendliness, he shouldn't be so angry about it. But later, in the first territory they arrived in, there was a banner literally written, "Welcome, Third Prince." There was a retinue of knights waiting for them. Raymond was dumbfounded. He didn't expect this. Ernie said this was a good welcome ceremony, and the Duke of Sid himself was there. Actually, his name is Haim Theodore. Erna thanked him very much for the welcome. Haim said no, they were just paying due respect to His Majesty jumping to the front line at such a young age. He asked if by any chance he had already fought orcs. Ern almost said, "Of course I have," then remembered he had read in a book how to fight them, and forgot he was no longer in his past life. Ern said that actually most of his soldiers didn't even know what one was. They had never even seen one. "At least they will learn. They are good at learning." Haim said that was great. In that case, he said to His Majesty that he could give him a little gift. Later, they were in the dungeon of Count Sid. Haim said the gift was inside. So, of course, Erna went ahead accompanied by his soldiers, but the doors closed behind them. Erna asked what Haim was thinking. He told him not to be so surprised. Then he lit up the entire corridor, and the knights wondered if that trapped thing was an orc. Haim said that for now it was just a prisoner. To survive on the battlefield, you have to know what these guys are, their habits, instincts, everything that can be used in combat. Ernie asked what exactly this gift they were talking about was. Haim said this was the gift information about the war. "Is there a more valuable gift than this?" Ern said that actually this was very good and thanked him. He thought this guy was crazier than he thought. The guy tortures orcs. But he noticed that his knights were not very comfortable. Ern asked, "What is the name of this knight behind me?" He introduced himself as Simon Peksu, the son of Baron Wolf. Erna told him to say honestly what was on his mind. Simon thought that maybe they shouldn't go this far. He thought that taking prisoners of war was a bit much. Erna said he might think that way for now, but then he asked Haim to open the cage doors and told Simon that this was a battle now. He had to fight the orc. He prepared himself facing the creature, but the orc suddenly banged its head on the ground, It didn't stop banging its head on the ground, and Simon turned his back on the creature, saying this was ridiculous. It was just a prisoner. It had already lost its mind. But no, the orc landed a direct punch on Simon that almost crushed his head. The orc got him in a chokehold, taking him hostage. Ern told everyone to prepare for combat, and Heim warned that this orc's tendons were already cut. But he said that even all wounded, this was the true capability of an orc. That's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Consider the Members Club. This work you just saw is a very new work, so we've already done all the chapters. When more are released, we'll bring part 2. Don't worry, we're not the type of channel that abandons works. From time to time, Kay abandons more works, but I keep nagging him to come back. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, bye.